talked a lot this evening about equity and about issues that are facing our community. But the thing that I find frustrating and I want to talk about is the greatest disparity we have with our students is for students with disabilities. And if you look at the numbers, they're not where they need to be. There are a lot of inequities. We talk about inequities based on race and inequities based on other things, but there are also, unfortunately, inequities based on ability and disability. And as a school system, these are our most vulnerable students, and I would like to see us obviously do a better job and place the resources where we need them, but also become more aware, because I think awareness is the first step. So what I would like to do is I would like to move that the Board of Education instruct that all equity training includes bias training on disabilities, no matter who the training is for.
A second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded for Ms. Delmont Small's motion. Ms. Mallow.
The clarification, do we know if that is already included in part of, did you reach out to the equity office to, like, is this already part of what we do?
Ms. Delmont Small?
My understanding is that it is not part of what we do, and I think it definitely should be part of what we do. So obviously, in the motion that Dr. Wu made, if we're already doing it, we would not be redoing it. So the same with this motion is that if we're doing it, fantastic. But if we're not, then we should.
Okay.
I think it's kind of our reinforcement, a commitment to really focus on this as well.
Okay,
Yes.
Ms. Taj, did you have your hand up for this?
Yeah, I would like to understand from staff about what we do. I mean, then should we add like anti-Semitic training, xenophobia, anti-immigrant, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ? Like, I suppose, I guess I'd like to know what we are currently doing in our training, how our modules are done, what our framework looks like, because I'd like to see all of those included. But I think we probably cannot do all of those with meaning. I guess I'd like to get input from the staff.
Okay, and I'm going to ask that we come back to this to get information from staff through maybe an email. I think they are listening to us in terms of all the groups that could possibly be included. I must admit, when I was teaching government, I've told you before, there was a unit on equal opportunity for all, and all the groups were covered. We talked about racial groups. We talked about religious groups. We talked about students who had special needs. And we talked about the bias that they face, such as somebody in a wheelchair might be yelled at because he's in a wheelchair, has special needs, so people are yelling at him. Or somebody who can't see, people also might yell at. Or people might bully and name call students who receive special education services. So I think that it's not hard to include all groups as we talk about the various bias and limitations and equity treatments. I don't think that that's a hard thing to incorporate. I think that our staff is probably doing it based on what needs to be done within our community. But I think that the specifics on it, if we could wait to do that after we go through the motion, I think that would be best, because we're really about an hour behind schedule right now. So we have a motion. Are you okay with that, Ms. Taj?
Well, can we include all vulnerable groups?
How is that, Ms. Delmont Small? How do you feel about that? Do you want to include that in your motion?
Well,
You can say yes or no, and then
I would like to provide an explanation.
Okay.
I find it sad that when I bring up wanting to include bias training on disabilities, that there's so much against that. When you look at the only schools where we had disproportionate discipline issues were for only students with disabilities, not for anything else. And we have to improve that. And I find it confusing as to why my staff member, my fellow board members would find a difficulty in supporting. Part of our role in federal law is that we provide an education for students with disabilities. And we clearly are not doing a good job. And when I bring forth a motion that hopefully will help us to do, at the very least, the letter of the law, that I am met with this type of, well, we shouldn't do this. I think it is so important that we support these students, because that was the one group, the one area where we were told by staff should not be cut. And this board, myself, I did not, and other board members didn't, but we cut when we sent it to the county executive, and was the area when the county executive categorized his funding, he didn't put enough in it for the educators. So I don't think we need any more examples of where we are not stepping up and listening to the voices and helping those students with disabilities and their parents and their families get them the education that they need so that they can succeed as they move forward.
Okay, Ms. Taj, did you want to respond, or are we?
Yes. I feel like you're mischaracterizing what I said. I absolutely think we should do this. I also think that we should have training. We have vulnerable groups who have hate and bias incidents in the school system. We just allocated $13.5 million over last year's funding for special education. $13.5 million towards resource allocation. This board talks about special education as a priority more than any other vulnerable group. We have not made that level of financial investment in closing opportunity gaps ever, let alone in 1 year. So we're talking about canceling world language. You were talking about canceling DEI positions in this climate of hate. We were talking about, we have talked about canceling and looking at equity, and every time there's money or even talk of money going into closing the achievement gap or anti-racist work, it's always, well, we just don't have the money. Yet we had $13.5 million to put towards special education to increase that over last year. I'm not arguing that we need it. I'm saying we just have a lot of other needs. To say we ignore special education as a board is absolutely wrong. We had a board member who the budget had already gone to the county executive, and we had no money and wanted to add $15 million over the $13.5 million increase after everything was done, when there wasn't even a place in the process to do that. We value the investment in special education as a system and as a board. What we don't want to do is confuse that. It's a both and. What we have to do is make a commitment financially and with our resources and with our training to address the issues of racial inequity and historic inequities. We're talking about redlining. We're talking about segregation. We're talking about those issues that never get air. So I'll wrap it up with saying that I absolutely think we should have that, but we should also have Islamophobia training, anti-Semitic training, anti-racist, anti-bias, able, to have all of those together as one vulnerable group, but not separate out and highlight just one of those while also investing in them heavily. Like, I think we need to do financial investment and resource allocation and training investment in all of those groups. So I think adding a vulnerable population group is, to me, the most inclusive of all of those things.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Taj. if there's anybody who wants to speak on this, I see a bunch of hands. Miss Mallow, we'll go to you. And we'll try and, I got a note from Miss Caternio that she lost her Wi-Fi, so we'll hold off for a minute if we have to take a vote. Miss Mallow.
I just want to clarify that I was not objecting in any way, shape, or form. I was just asking, do we already do it? That's not an objection. That's if we're already doing it, yay for us. If we're not, then it is something we need to remediate. But the idea that you're going to feel like we're saying that this isn't important and this isn't valuable is an incorrect interpretation of what many of us have said and committed to budgetarily.
Okay. I think we can see if this will pass without Miss Caternio being online. She did lose connection. So Miss Hanks, will you go ahead and call the question, please?
Sure. I have a motion by Ms. Delmont Small and a second by Dr. Wu to move that all equity and training include bias training on all disabilities. Is that correct, Ms. Delmont Small?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Ms. Coombs?
Yes, although I had my hand raised and I didn't get to speak, so that doesn't feel very affirming right now either.
Are we continuing with the vote?
Yes.
I voted yes.
Okay, thank you. Is Ms. Catronio back on yet?
No.
Okay. Ms. Delmont Small?
Yes.
Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Ms. Mallow?
Yes.
Ms. Taj?
I'm going to abstain because I believe it should include all vulnerable groups.
Okay. Dr. Wu?
Yes.
Ms. Alston?
Yes.
Motion passes 601.
Okay. Is there anyone else with the board report? I see Ms. Delmont Small. Is your hand still up, or were you through?
Yes. No, I would just like to respond to my colleague. With regard to the groups that Dr. Wu had mentioned, my concern was that students with disabilities were not included. I would say that the groups that he mentioned would include the groups that Ms. Taj is concerned about. And I agree with Ms. Taj. I think every group should be included. But I wanted to make sure specifically that students with disabilities are included because, as I said, they haven't seemed to have been included in the past. So I wanted to make sure that moving forward we did.
So then I will clarify my abstention because when I asked.
Back and forth. We're not going to go back and forth on this. We voted on the motion already. It has passed.
Okay.
Ms. Coombs.
Shush. So that was a very disappointing discussion there. I do not understand this constant pitting of special ed and equity when there is incredible overlap. We know that Black boys, African-American boys are overrepresented in special education, and the disproportionalities are so evident there. And I do not know why we have this discussion. We have to pay money. We are legally required under IDEA to pay money. Moving on, try to turn this back into a positive. Ms. Alston, it was an honor to see you demonstrate your performing abilities, both musically and in spoken word. You are really a well-rounded student, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to have you on. I'm sorry for some of these kind of middle school discussions that we get into that kind of make you look like the adult in the room.